Okay, let's talk about strict liability torts. And we might have several of those types. For example, strict product liability, right? You might have an unreasonably dangerous or defective product, and those could come in several forms, right? You could have a production defect, meaning that somewhere's along the line, somebody's not tightening the nut tight enough, and so something falls off, right? It creates a tort there. That'd still be a strict liability. The manufacturer has an obligation to check those things, right? A design defect means that it goes back before then, right? We've created something that just doesn't work quite right, okay? A tire that doesn't handle speeds up to 100 miles an hour, whatever the case may be, the design itself is defective. And then a warning defect, and we've all seen the humorous ones, don't use a hairdryer while sleeping or, something like that. But there are legitimate ones, too, that say, warnings about side effects maybe for drugs or those types of things that are insufficient. Okay, and those can certainly cause some issues and create strict liability. Responding to superior scope of employment. This is interpreted pretty widely. So if somebody in their actions, creates a liability, it can come back to the business if they happen to be an employee of that, and if they're acting within the scope of their employment. And again, a real broad interpretation. When I was an officer of the bank, and it was probably close to 24/7. There were times when I might have gone to events like the Pheasants Forever, and even if I paid for the ticket myself and went, I may well have been considered a representative of the bank while I was there, because maybe I'm talking business, maybe I brought up somebody's accounts, or somebody asked me a question about a loan or something while I was there. Might well have been considered in the scope of my employment. So if I did something like buy drinks or something and then somebody got in a wreck, it may have, never did, but may have come back to the bank. Again, it's interpreted extremely broadly. There's been some workers' comp cases where they've talked about what's the scope of somebody's employment, and it's a very broad interpretation. So ultra-hazardous activities, I'll give you these, and they're not, maybe not the best example because they're not ultra-hazardous, but it'd give you an idea. When a train goes down the tracks, you got metal wheels on metal rails, and the result is oftentimes sparks, and sparks oftentimes cause fires. And when that happens, the railroad's just strictly liable. Okay, just is. Okay, the railroad's obligated to fence off their right-of-way. They choose not to sometimes. Okay, even if they choose to, if a cow or a horse, gets through their fence, or in a place where they've chosen not to fence it off, and they hit that cow or horse, guess what? They're going to pay for it. Okay. Some other strict liability torts. Dram shop acts. We know that tavern owners are going to be held liable for intoxicated patrons. This one, is it the last bar you were in? Is it the 3 bars you were in when you were out bar hopping that are all held equally responsible? And I don't know. I imagine state law maybe tries to tell us who's responsible in those cases, but I'm not sure that I know the answer to that. I think it usually, most often, goes to the last bar, the last drink that you had. Common carriers. Okay, common carriers are going to be strictly liable. So if you're a trucker, right, and you damage goods because you got in a wreck or something, but you might be accepted if there's acts of God that are involved, or action of an alien enemy, or order of public authority, right? So the goods got damaged because the road was closed for conditions, construction, something like that, and maybe you had some goods that needed to be kept cold and they couldn't. Okay, so you might be held not responsible in that case. Inherent nature of the goods, some ultra-hazardous goods that are being shipped, or misconduct of the shipper. They didn't package it properly or something to that effect, right? And again, some of these things like acts of God, well, maybe, but you still expect that carrier has to be properly prepared for some of those, like chains for their vehicle. If they know that they're going to a place that's going to be snowy and icy, by golly, they should have a set of chains, right? And if they don't, they still might be held liable even though there was a heck of a snowstorm. So damages, okay, and actually there's 3 types of damages, although this only says 2. I'll talk about the third. There's compensatory damages, and this is for all the torts, all 3 torts. And compensatory is designed to make a plaintiff whole, okay? That's, go back to our car wrecks. You run into somebody's car, whether or not somebody gets hurt, but let's just assume nobody gets hurt. It causes $5,000 damage to the car. They get the estimates, it gets fixed, the $5,000. Okay, that's compensatory damages. It's making it whole. It's fixing the car to the condition that it was before the wreck. Punitive damages are used to punish the defendant. That's where their actions maybe were so egregious that we're gonna put in a penalty so that hopefully they'll never do this again. You generally see, a lot of the large awards that you see, those headline awards that so-and-so, got awarded $15 billion or something goofy. Some of the banks have been paying some awards for, the way they treated customers in the mortgage crisis and whatnot. Some of those have been in the billions of dollars, and a lot of those are punitive damages, okay, over and above what the customers suffered in terms of actual damages. They do that in an effort to prevent that from happening, hopefully, in the future. Yeah, so I kind of got ahead of myself, and this kind of gets into rights for injuries. Types can be past or future medical expenses, past or future economic loss. Very difficult to quantify that. Very, very difficult. Past or future pain and suffering. Okay, again, very, very difficult. Okay, to calculate those types of things. How do you know if the person is going to get back to work, or are they going to be able to have the same kind of job, lesser job? How many years would they work until they retired, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, and punitive damages, again, I got ahead of myself a little bit. Usually it's, gross, willful, or wanton. And exemplary damages, meaning we're trying to make an example. Tort reform. These are not necessarily things that are happening now. These are maybe some of the suggestions, right? Okay, one suggestion might be that we can't sue retailers unless the manufacturer has become insolvent, or that the case against the retailer wouldn't take place, unless the manufacturer was insolvent, that we're going to go to the person or the company that made that product. Gets back to the production design or those types of things. Yeah, maybe. No recovery for a defective design, and that, I guess I'm not sure I understand, but I think this might be when people make changes. Okay, so even though there may be a defective design to a product, if people make changes then that actually change the nature of the vehicle or whatever, they wouldn't be able to reap a reward. Okay, you buy a car and you soup it up in some fashion. Okay, you may not be able to get an award then because you've made a defective design. You've changed the design of the vehicle and made it defective. No claims against sellers if the product is modified by a user. Kind of same thing there. State of the art is a defense where you say it was made to the highest standards of its time, and you can understand folks are getting sued, or maybe they're suing GM for a car that was made 10 years ago because it didn't have this type of airbag. Well, those types of airbags might not have been available 10 years ago. Okay, and so state of the art would be a defense that says, we made it to the best quality that we could at the time, given the materials, and et cetera, et cetera. It's a defense. Not saying that it's always going to be successful or ever successful. A statute of repose says this. And I'll tell you where this the best example I can think of for this was airplanes. Small plane manufacturing, in fact, completely disappeared in the U.S. almost. And the reason for that is that some of these plane manufacturers were actually getting sued for planes that were like 40 and 50 years old, you know, and people were still out flying them because planes are expensive. And something would happen, something would break on the plane, and the plane would crash, and the person would die, and the family would sue and say that it was a defective product. Well, it was never meant to last that long, okay? But they were winning these lawsuits, and so Congress actually passed a statute of repose that said in an airplane, you know, a personal craft like that, if it's over 25 years old, it's like, sorry, you're on your own then. Okay, we can't sue for design or production defects. And there's been a lot of push to reduce or eliminate punitive damage awards. You especially see this in the medical malpractice, trying to reduce medical costs. So, you know, nobody's saying we're going to reduce the compensatory damages. You know, so if they operate on the wrong knee, you know, they have to compensate you to a degree that makes you whole. But our punitive damage, you know, our $10 million in punitive damage is warranted, and you know, there's been some push to limit those damages at least. Some alternatives to the tort system that come up, right? Some of the disadvantages of the tort system is that lawyers will oftentimes take on lawsuits without any fees. So the plaintiff doesn't have to come up with any money. An attorney takes the case. If there's a payoff, the attorney makes a lot of money, as do the plaintiffs, perhaps. I've seen some huge awards, especially in class action lawsuits, and I think I've given you guys a couple of examples where the plaintiffs got literally nothing, and the lawyers walked away with millions of dollars. You know, is that right? I don't know. And so there's been some consideration of looking at that and maybe limiting how much lawyers could get, things like that. Some alternatives to tort might be some arbitration. No-fault insurance, and some states have no-fault insurance for vehicle wrecks for that very reason. Workers' compensation is an example of a no-fault system. Okay, in our state, and I think most states, for example, if not all. If you get hurt at work, you know, unless it was self-inflicted and you did it on purpose, intentionally, you should be entitled to compensation, workers' compensation. Okay, no fault. Okay, that prevents you from suing the employer, right? And the employer, though, however, has to carry and pay for this workers' comp that covers you then if something does happen. This says the employer acted unreasonably, but that, you know, that doesn't have to be. I mean, it could just be in the normal course of, you know, it's one of those things happen, right? You know, if it snowed during the day and the crew didn't get here to get the walk all cleared off, and I slipped on the way outside and fell, okay, probably in the scope of my employment, probably going to get workers' comp if I suffered some harm, right? Defenses. Assumption of risk or contributory negligence or the fellow servant rule. We don't really, in Montana anyhow, we don't see those. Ours is truly a no-fault system. Again, other states may have different systems. I know that the federal system that the railroad uses is different. You know, there is a contributory negligence part in their system. So somebody that gets injured on the railroad, while we hear a lot of awards that they get paid to people, the railroad can look at it and they can defend it based on, you know, did the person not follow policy, for example. Okay. Test for compensation: is the injury accidental? Again, not self-inflicted or whatever, and was it a result of employment? Again, considered very broadly. The exclusive remedy rule means that that's it. Okay, I can only go to the workers' comp. I can't then sue my employer above and beyond that. Many states have enacted or considering laws classifying certain breeds of dogs as dangerous wild animals. Rottweilers, Dobermans, Pit Bulls. Do you own one of those breeds? If so, are you comfortable knowing that you could be strictly liable? You know, if the neighbor kid sticks his hand through your chain link fence and gets it bitten, Even if the neighbor kid was harassing the dog, you could still be considered reliable. So, considered liable, say that correctly. There we go. We've hit the end.